A little while ago, I put a survey up for my YouTube subscribers. Which AI chat experience do you feel offers the best responses? ChatGPT, Bing Chat, or Google Bard? The resounding winner was ChatGPT. But if we truly put all three of these tools up against one another directly, on the same prompts, does ChatGPT reliably win, or does it just have the advantage of being the brand property that started all this buzz about AI last year? In this video, we're going to drag race these tools. We're going to see which responds fastest and which provides better answers. To keep things equal, because both Bing Chat and Bard can access internet data, we're going to be using ChatGPT Plus with the GPT-4 model with the Bing-powered web browsing capability turned on. To get some sample prompts, I did a web search for the best AI chat prompts and chose some from the highest ranking result, which was this Forbes article. I reframed each of the prompts to focus on a topic that many viewers of this channel will be familiar with, Microsoft 365 and Power Platform, and also sprinkled in a couple of requests related to my business to see how they did on those. Now obviously this isn't an exact science. I'm not doing something like asking bar exam questions and seeing which does best. This has already been done. There's a lot of subjectivity involved here alongside our speed test, but I think that's more representative of real-world day-to-day use. So let the races begin. Bard takes just 4 seconds to generate a response. It highlights Power Apps, Power Automate and Power BI as components of Power Platform, but doesn't go into more depth. Its overview of how to get started is okay, if a little superficial, but the fact that it doesn't provide reference links is a big weakness on this sort of query. It did try to give some real-life examples and analogies, but these weren't too sophisticated. Bing takes nearly 7 times as long as Bard to complete its response. It is more specific and somewhat more technically detailed, but it focused more directly on Power Apps than on Power Platform generally. The fact that it highlights and links to specific resources is somewhat more helpful than Bard, as Microsoft Learn, for example, is definitely a good place to start. And I think referring to the platform components as environments is potentially misleading, considering we also have a concept of environments for Dataverse in Power Platform. ChatGPT decides we should think of Power Platform components as the members of a band. However, phrases like referencing Power BI as often the most visible I think is a little misleading, and it seems to be working hard to fit Power Platform into the structure of this analogy. Its outline of how to get started is similar to Bard's. Halfway through the response, it decides to get more data from the web, and this takes an age. It also breaks the flow of its response after browsing the web and almost seems to start again. But it then provides a very thorough overview of how to get started with Power BI, and I mean thorough. After 203 seconds, it just seems to give up midstream, although by that point it has provided a lot more specific information than either Bard or Bing, alongside useful web links. Bard provides the quickest response at 5 seconds, with Bing second at 29 seconds. Both provide a pretty generalised outline of how to study, but Bing's answer is enhanced by providing specific links to information related to the PL100 exam. This is definitely more helpful than Bard's response that really provides nothing specific to the certification I've highlighted to study for. On this, ChatGPT takes an entirely different approach. It works out that it doesn't have enough information to give me a customised response, and it asks me a series of follow-up questions. It then designs a study plan taking into account the amount of time over which I have to study, the time each day I can devote to studying, and the exam's course overview. It references where I might find more resources, but this time it doesn't provide links. Between the sophistication of ChatGPT's plan customization and the links provided by Bing, I have a good response, but neither provided everything that might be useful. Bard's very generic response was an okay starting point, but overall was the worst. Bard, again, is quickest, but not as quick this time. Perhaps we are seeing the difference that gets experienced when it goes out to the web, as it does include some specific references to websites this time around. It lists 2 official Microsoft communities and LinkedIn Learning, although there are definitely better, more specific groups on LinkedIn. Bing takes 3 times as long to get to much the same answer as Bard, although it doesn't include the information about getting the most from communities that Bard did. In this case, I think this is the first response where Bing's response is objectively worse than Bard's. ChatGPT offers a few more options, including more specifics on social media options, but I'm not sure it adds anything that is worth waiting 5 times longer for a response than from Bard. Again, Bard was quickest, but take a look at its responses. I was intrigued about the Microsoft 365 Copilot community, but I found it didn't exist. Bard had made this up, and there was no site found at the page Bard directed me to on the Microsoft website. On this one, ChatGPT actually took second place, but it didn't do a web search and didn't provide any actual links to resources. Bing, on the other hand, provided links, but also provided only 2 resources. I'm not sure I would necessarily categorise any of these responses as being particularly good. At least Bing and ChatGPT didn't hallucinate any of their response though. So again, Bard is quickest, but unfortunately, even given the website address, it's identified the wrong company. This is pretty shocking for a product from Google and underlines a real reliability issue with the responses Bard provides to simple everyday requests. I'm unsure if this is a real company with same similar name to mine or something Bard hallucinated. Bing provides an accurate but very short answer, and again ChatGPT gets hung up with searching the web. I won't bore you by making you sit through the 87 seconds ChatGPT took to come up with a response. It was accurate, but it was very long, and it pretty much just replicated what was on my website. But I underline that it took 87 seconds to appear, in which time I could have just gone to the website and browsed several pages myself. With YouTube being owned by Google, you'd expect Bard to have this down, but in just a few seconds, Bard gives an answer that's totally wrong. That's not my YouTube channel, and that's not what I make videos about. Then, a few seconds later, Bard tries its answer, and again, it's wrong. This isn't my YouTube channel, but it seems to be a different one than the one Bard found, or perhaps one or both of them just made up a channel that doesn't exist. Given that each of these platforms has the capability to inject grounding information from the web, I'm really confused by these results. So that just leaves ChatGPT, and again it takes an age to try to connect to the web, and it fails somewhat, but it still does give a reasonable answer, a much better answer than either Bard or Bing, even though it highlights that it didn't succeed at browsing to the page it wanted to. So the fastest responses definitely come from Bard, but Bing isn't that much slower. On the other hand, ChatGPT gives you time to go and make yourself a coffee and return while it's still trying to download material from the web. Overall, Bard was over 2 minutes quicker to answer all of the prompts combined than ChatGPT was to fully respond to the first. Now, while it's quickest, I also think that Bard is the most disappointing. A property made by the owners of YouTube should not be beaten on that platform by ChatGPT. But it's not just this measure that Bard is worse on. I think that on every example given here, the answers provided by Bard were at best no better and at worst significantly behind the responses given by Bing and ChatGPT. We know that for decades Google has been obsessive in page load times. I forget the exact reference, but my bookshelf has several titles that are to do with Google's early days, and how quickly they were able to serve results was an important differentiating measure. I wonder if Google has transposed this concern to Bard, and if it's sacrificing quality to achieve speed. If it is, then I think that's a mistake, as even if Bard had taken 2 to 3 times as long to respond to several of these prompts, it still would have been in the same ballpark as Bing, and definitely not as slow as ChatGPT. I would guess that the user psychology connected with speed when it comes to these types of responses is a little different than search. Right now, this is novel, and I think the majority of us are readily aware that something fairly complex is going on in the background to achieve what we're seeing. Just as we don't mind a colleague who slows down a conversation to think if they end up giving us a good answer, and far prefer this than a colleague who shares the first nonsense that comes to mind, I think Bard has time on its side to give a better answer if that's the problem we're seeing here. Fundamentally, Google doesn't have cloud infrastructure that is quicker than Microsoft's to the degree that we're seeing a difference in these response times. So either they are just doing something that's less technically sophisticated or doing it less thoroughly to achieve the times we're seeing. Considering both ChatGPT and Bing are leveraging the same model, GPT-4, and the same web index through Bing search, the vast differences in their responses is interesting. However, when we think about this in terms of the finances of providing these services, I think we have some good clues as to what's going on. ChatGPT Plus, which gives me access to GPT-4 rather than GPT 3.5, is a paid service that costs me $20 a month, whereas Bing Chat is free. We know that Microsoft wraps your requests, whether they are going through Bing or in the future through Copilot, to their AI model in a standardized template prompt that creates some of the rules of what you get as a response. So it seems likely that for this free service, Microsoft also provides context that curtails the response you get back to make it cheaper to deliver. With ChatGPT Plus, I'm paying for my requests, so OpenAI doesn't have the same incentive to restrict what I might get back as a response. On the other hand, ChatGPT seems to have a far greater trouble accessing web material using Bing than the Bing Chat service does. This may simply be to do with how ChatGPT surfaces those problems, but very often I find when I'm using ChatGPT, it reports some problem or other getting hold of whatever web resource it was seeking out. I feel far more confident using ChatGPT when I'm able to give it the data I want it to look at, or I can access it reliably using a plugin. And day to day, when I'm requesting something that relies on web data, I find myself using Bing Chat most of the time. With Bard, we simply have no way to know how well it's using web data to form its answers, other than the simple observation that its answers are pretty bad a lot of the time. Day to day, I find I use Bing Chat a lot more than ChatGPT, even though I subscribe to ChatGPT Plus. Where I do find myself using ChatGPT is those more complex needs where I need to have a back and forth process based on something concrete, either generated by the AI or by me. For example, I will often use ChatGPT to help with editing of written content. I also enjoy using the plugins on ChatGPT, as obviously that's the only place to use plugins so far, and I do find that they can improve ChatGPT's reliability in accessing web data. For things that are more singular and transactional, Bing Chat works better for me. I feel it is much better at handling web-based information. ChatGPT Plus plugins is possibly as good, but getting a window open with those features turned on is a multi-click process, whereas with Bing it just works by default. Bing is certainly not as reliable in complex back and forth dialogues though. I am yet to find a use case where I find Bard more enjoyable or more reliable than either Bing Chat or ChatGPT, and frankly any version of ChatGPT, not just GPT-4 with web browsing enabled. When I got access to Bard, I was excited as I immediately thought it would help to analyse information to do with YouTube much better than Bing because YouTube is a Google property, but it doesn't. It truly sucks at that. In planning this video, I imagined that Bard would do better, as it's been some time since I've used it and apparently it's been upgraded several times, but having recorded this video, I think it's just as bad as it was when it was first released. Before Bing Chat, I used to access the Google website every single day. It's now a rarity. I just hope that my value to Microsoft in being acquired as a Bing customer is worth the cost of the fairly constant usage I make of Bing Chat, and it's expensive to run AI tech. What's your experience with using these tools? Am I being too hard on Bard? Leave your views down in the comments. I hope this video has been useful to you. I will continue making more content that's to do with these AI tools. But until the next video, bye bye.